On an average day, over 40,000 passengers will grab their luggage, pass through customs, and eventually walk into the main welcome area here at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, Israel. But for 15 travelers, their arrival on this day would be anything but average, and in fact, to some, it would be historic. These are senior faith leaders from New York, representing some of the most influential congregations in the city and beyond. Muslim imams, Christian priests, reverends, ministers, and rabbis traveling together in search of dialogue, in search of understanding, in search of answers.
So your expectations for the week, what do you think?
Oh my goodness. I'm here to learn, here to observe. Yes.
They have agreed to take part in an interfaith mission to Israel. And during the 5-day journey ahead, they will go to the biblical and historical center of each of their faiths, meet and speak with members of the media, members of the Knesset, the Palestinian Authority, ultra-Orthodox Jewry, the Christian Church, legendary Israeli leaders, and ultimately, average citizens who will all share their dream for peace in the Middle East, as seen through the lens of their own religion, their own vision of history, and their own life experience.
It took a lot of work to get it all done. First of all, we had to come up with the vision and the concept.
Omni says it's interfaith, and I said, sign me up.
I wondered who would actually be able to go, because to sort of gather up people who are in charge of these institutions and get them to actually go someplace together for a week might be challenging.
He says it's in January. I said, sign me up.
It didn't occur to me not to go. I thought he'd call back after a while and say, you know, I tried, but I just can't get this really interfaith group to go.
He said, it's free. I said, sign me up.
On the one hand, I was thrilled. To visit Israel and Palestine had been a dream of a lifetime. I'd been studying and memorizing and thinking about Israel and Palestine all my life. On the other hand, I'd never visited, and All Souls is a religiously diverse community. Lots of people of Jewish culture and religion, and lots of people who would tend to take more the Palestinian side of things. So I was concerned about whether or not I'd be able to navigate this, and whether or not, if I went, I would presume to be on the Israeli side of things, which in some cases I was, and in some cases not. So I was concerned and ambivalent.
My first question was why he had called me, why I was on that list.
Unless there were women and Muslims on the trip, that I couldn't make sense of going myself.
Here is an opportunity for you to be a part of this and to do whatever the work that you think you can do in this situation. Who am I to deny that? And that was, I decided, I called back and I said, yes, I'm in.
It's very hard to say no to Omni. And because I know Omni, I know what type of trip was going to be. I know that we're going to wake up very early. I know that we're going to be late, at night very late. And I said, I'm not too old for this.
So what does it mean, an imam going to Israel with an interfaith group? And then as I gave it something, let me get back to you in a couple of days, give it some thought. So as I started thinking about it and mentioned it to a couple of people whose opinions I respect, oh, you know they're going to use you for political photo ops. You're going to be the poster boy for Israel.
And then my second question was there some kind of an agenda for this trip?
So I checked out the list of who was going as well. I saw Rabbi Peter Rubenstein's name, who I knew, had known for several years and know about his commitments, both to the state of Israel and to communicating across lines of difference. So for me, that was enough.
My first impression was one of fascination and interest. I spoke to Ammi about how it happened. I wanted to know what his intention was, what his vision for the trip was.
I remember exactly where we were when he pulled me aside and he cornered me and said, "This is important, Elliot." He said, "This is important for us as clergy. It's important for what we'll accomplish while we're there. And because both Ammi and I are really looking to put the building blocks in place for the next years to come, this was also an opportunity to put some foundation stones that'll serve the New York religious community into the years ahead.
But after a while I said, I have to be with this group.
Particularly living in New York City, a trip like this seems like a no-brainer, almost like an essential thing that we ought to be doing.
And the key objective was to put together a group of senior religious leaders who could make a difference in this city and around the world.
So Ammi has put a lot of time into putting a program together, I'm sure with a number of your inputs as well. And my responsibility is to be the chief shepherd for all of you shepherds. And it could very well
to truly understand what ultimately brought these faith leaders together on a bus headed for Jerusalem, we need to look back nearly a decade. September 12th, 2001. And the world awoke to a brand new day. One covered with ash, soot, and fear. America had been attacked a day earlier, and the lessons as well as the healing from that tragic day have taken many forms, one of which was seeking the counsel of our faith leaders. New Yorkers were looking for dialogue, looking for understanding, looking for answers, and as it turns out, those very faith leaders were looking for the very same thing.
I live in the city, so I went to work in the same way I always went to work. So I took a bus at 6:45 in the morning. People were stunned and dazed, and I remember thinking on the way to work, the issues have to change. We need to come together, people of different faiths and good faith. We need to come together to heal the world and to preempt extremism, because if we leave the space empty, extremists will walk in.
September 10th, 2010, and New Yorkers were contemplating the impending anniversary of the 9/11 attacks with mixed emotions. The decades since had been filled with a confusing mix of politics, healing, anger, and controversy. For Rabbi Ammiel Hirsch, senior rabbi at Stephen Wise Free Synagogue in Manhattan, the anniversary gave him inspiration to reflect from his bima.
Religion is a source of inspiration, not intimidation. At its best, religion is about setting our hearts ablaze with a passion for the love of our neighbors, not setting holy books ablaze for the passion of the hate of our neighbors.
Rabbi Hirsch spoke of terrorism.
All too many religious institutions are built and represented by people whose hands drip with blood. I want to stand with those of clean hands who seek to build a house of peace.
He spoke of healing and a vision for the future.
We should support those who seek to build up a new generation of moderate, peace-loving people by building up moderate and peace-loving institutions. How else are we going to impact on people if not through institutions and leaders who are devoted to moderation?
And yes, he spoke about interfaith dialogue and coexistence.
We need partners to construct the ladder. We cannot do it alone. We need people of different faiths to unite in common faith that we can make of this world a better place. Religion brings out the worst in all too many people. We must partner with religious leaders who can bring out the best in people.
We have an obligation, a moral and religious obligation in the aftermath of 9/11 to come together and to be a force for good, a force for moderation, a force for coexistence and peace.
Which finally brings us back to our bus full of senior faith leaders leaving Ben Gurion Airport on their way to Jerusalem. It's a unique union born from the ashes of terrorism and tragedy, each standing on a different spiritual foundation, and each in search of dialogue, in search of understanding, in search of answers.
We're going to be going
into Jewish communities in the week down in the Etzion block, southwest of Jerusalem. We're going to be going into Palestinian autonomous areas of Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem, and Ramallah, north of Jerusalem. And we're going to be going close to Gaza over here, and not going into Gaza, but going very close to Gaza, literally almost able to touch the fence of Gaza. And you'll hopefully go home understanding the proximity of everything, but also the complexity of everything.
So what is the solution? How do you build bridges between people, between religions, between history and hatred? How do you build coalitions between communities whose humanity is blinded by the voices around them? This was our mission, to have an opportunity to listen to the voices on all sides and see if there is room for coexistence and understanding.
Look what happened here since the completing of those new revolutions, of the Arab Spring. Slowly, slowly, we're witnessing another change, another huge change. And this is the rising of the political Islam.
There have been attempts to try to introduce civil marriage that have failed time again. The one thing that has succeeded just very recently is the introduction of a law that allows people who can prove that they have no religion to be able to get married civilly.
That's great.
People are less concerned with theological discussions. They need to live. But for leaders, many times, the theory is more important than life.
ככל שיהיה הקצנה דתית בכל דבר, ככה השלום יברח מאיתנו.
The more religious extremism, the more peace will continue to be.
והם לומדים, ואני מלמד אותם, גם אם הם תחת כיבוש ישראלי, אין האסלאם מתיר להם לעשות מעשה איבה. ואני דיברתי על זה בתוכנית רק לפני יומיים.
I can also point at a number of cases in Gaza and the West Bank of people who are under the influence of radical Islam have come to our teaching and have begun to change their worldviews.
Our interfaith leaders came with more questions than answers. As our trip began, I don't think anyone could have predicted the impact this experience would have on them and on their vision of a path towards peace. Throughout the trip, each interfaith leader had an opportunity to experience historic and religious sites in a way they may not have before, through the eyes, through the religion, and even through the narrative of their interfaith colleagues.
Here you have one square belongs to this community, half a column belongs to that community, and the most important part of the church, we're going to see in a second, are shared by three communities together. It's a very complicated reality.
And there came to me this phrase, the shrine of the exact spot, this obsession, frankly, with where a thing is supposed to have happened. As a Protestant, one can be, I don't say all Protestants are, freed from the notion that actions in history have made space holy.
The whole idea of place being sacred, at least from the Catholic tradition, comes from the fact that we know that those are not the places, or if they are, that's even better. But those places are made holy by the faith of the people who have come there over centuries.
Place is holy, in that every place is holy, that every place that I anchor my feet is holy. But a thing that I've been doing lots and lots in my spiritual life in the last couple of months is at times of trouble, at times of question, at times of inner turmoil, breathing deeply and just saying, here, feeling myself in that place, and that place becomes holy.
My faith and that of many Protestants is really completely separated from a concern about holy places, holy lands, to tell you the truth.
When you would come here with your communities, or you would encourage your neighboring communities to come to Jerusalem, introduce the city as a multicultural, multi-religious city, and to see the uniqueness and the beauty in that, and not to emphasize on the conflict and the difficulties of that, because we can learn a lot from each other. And I think we learned a little lesson just from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but I hope you will have other good lessons also in the Jewish quarter later on today.
I have a very different sense of place. Although God is accessible anywhere, I find God especially accessible at the wall.
Temple, I should say, that Jesus enters, and when Herod rebuilds, what he does, he creates a new mountain. And he builds a wall on the west that's 488 meters long, a northern wall and a southern wall a little less than 300 meters, and an eastern wall. And then he encloses a platform, and on top encloses this mountain. On top he puts a platform, and in the center is the temple itself. So make the distinction between the temple, which is up there around where the Dome of the Rock is today, and the Temple Mount around here. And the western wall we see here is a fragment. This 60-meter area open to us today is only 12.5% of the 488-meter long of the Temple Mount.
So this was my first trip. I'd spoken with two rabbis, friends of mine, who said, "Oh, you're going to Jerusalem. The thing you need to do is, hold on, let me give you this dollar." So one gave me gave me $1, and he blessed it. He's a Reformed rabbi. He says, when you get to Jerusalem, what you should do is give this $1 to someone, you'll know who it is, and your trip will be blessed. Thank you, Rabbi. Was talking to another rabbi and said, "Oh, I'm going to Jerusalem." He says, "Take this $1. Take this $1, and when you get to the Western Wall, put it in the tzedakah box, and your trip will be blessed." So I was instructed by a rabbi that when I get to Jerusalem, that I should take this tzedakah money, charity money, and place it into the tzedakah box. So you're my witness.
I think it's amazing that we've, within 15 minutes, gone to the heart and the soul of two different faiths. First to the Holy Sepulchre, now to the Great Wailing Wall. And it's just, the proximity is a wonderful thing, and I think that's precisely what, in a sense, our trip is all about, recognizing the proximity that exists between all these different groups of people.
So I think it's appropriate to come to this place that's sacred to Jews, but also to all monotheists, and certainly those of the children of Abraham, to say a prayer. I think it's appropriate. I'm happy I did it. Alhamdulillah.
It was so important for us to be in that space, having gone all that distance, and on this mission, if you will. We needed to be in that space.
We were told by the trip organizers that we would not be able to go inside the Alaska Mosque or the Dome of the Rock. A Muslim comes over to me, young man, "You Muslim?" I says, "Yes." He says, "Assalamu alaikum. Come with me." So he takes me to, and Dr. Ibrahim, to the entrance of the Alaska Masjid. And then there's another person there who says, "Are you Muslim?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Read Quran." So then I started to recite the opening surah to the Quran, Al-Fatiha, A'udhu billahi min shaitanir rajim, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We got to halfway of his, okay. So he then takes us inside this beautiful facility, this masjid. It was a moving experience to be there, to be able to pray in the masjid. And so I say this prayer now almost in tears.
The experience of a lifetime for any Muslim who visits Jerusalem to go to Haram al-Sharif and the Dome of the Rock. This was absolutely fabulous. And to pray, something I've dreamed of doing, so that when I am now finally in Jerusalem, to have the opportunity, it's almost surreal, but it's wonderful.
I was looking for the Spirit. When I got to Jerusalem, I said, I need to find the Spirit, and it was there. It was there that I actually felt the presence being in the holy city.
Well, we're on day 3 of 4 of the trip, and so far it's been an unbelievably important experience. The group itself, I think, is really an extraordinary opportunity to get to know and to get to develop relationships with other clergy and to deepen relationships with those that we may have already had. We go home to a country and a society that is already established, that already has a sense of unity, and that we have a constitution, we have a set of laws, we have a set of agreed upon principles that bind us all together. It doesn't exist here in any way similar to what we experience back home. And we also go home to a set of interfaith relationships that are part of the whole fabric of the way that we understand ourselves as Americans.
For us, interfaith, interreligious relationships are part of life. I mean, it's not something that we feel we can exempt ourselves from. It's part of the reality of modern day society.
I think what I took away also were the amazing dedication of people who are running programs, in Haifa, and in such small ways, but such powerful ways, indicated the goodness of people.
So it was stunning to get to Haifa and feel like you were having very different kinds of encounters between Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews, but the laughter, the day-to-day.
But if you stay here more than 4 days, I'm taxing you. Don't tell anybody that didn't warn you.
Interactions happening in other parts of the country.
You will always get what you want to see. And this is our message. You'll always get what you want to see. If you want to see war, you see it like that. You want to see differences, it's very easy to find. You want to for equalities, for shared life, for common things, you may need to look a little bit deeper, but you also will find it always.
It's a working class city, but it's also a city that works in the sense that Jews and Arabs interact more, they live in close proximity to each other, they shop in each other's stores, they also occasionally do business together.
אין לנו מטרה פוליטית, דרך אגב, שאנחנו צריכים לדעת.
Just to clarify, we have no political aims.
ואין לנו מטרה לשלטון.
We have no aims of power.
בגלל שהקוראן שמדבר על שלטון, הוא מדבר פסוק אחד.
Because the Quran, in only one verse, speaks about power.
אומר, ואין חכמתם, אם אתם בשלטון, תשלטו בצדק. זהו.
He said, all it says that if you're in power, you should use power justly.
First of all, thank you very, very much.
Yes. Thank you.
One of the highlights of our experience here. Partially because I think it's so unexpected to hear this perspective on religion. In the United States, there is very little appreciation of this perspective of Islam. The perspective of most Americans on Islam is that it's a violent, intolerant religion.
Barbed wire, 3-story security walls, bomb shelters, and security checkpoints. Welcome to the border that separates Israel and the Gaza Strip. Truly symbolic of the division that exists between communities, and even between friends and families in Israel.
As we're standing here, just in case we happen to hear a siren, and there's a chance that we'll have about 3 seconds to run back toward the bus, and just on this side of the bus is a small little concrete wall, and we'll try to fit all of us on the other side of it. It can happen. Hopefully it won't happen.
I watched the faces of my colleagues when we were standing overlooking Gaza, and they talked about, we have a warning system of 3 seconds or 5 seconds, and I could see the worry of people, well, where can I run in 5 seconds? And it was at that time that I realized if you've never been there, how strange it is to be confronted by, a missile could be here in 5 seconds.
So the guy says, if you hear a siren, you had 3 seconds to get to the shelter that was on the other side of the bus. Must have been about 100 feet away. So then he looks at us, some 11 of us, or how many there was, he says, and I don't think you're all going to fit.
And my name is Ronnie, and I live with this community from its very start. Netiv HaAsara means the route or the path of the 10. The 10 were 10 young soldiers who were killed in a helicopter crash on the shores of the northern Sinai.
Roni Kedar, a mother, a grandmother, became one of the most memorable personalities we met. Living in a small village in the shadow of the Israel-Gaza border, she talked about living in constant fear of bombs flying over the wall from Gaza.
And then slowly it got worse and worse, and we started having rockets and missiles and mortars thrown over. It became a current daily event that we would have an alert and we'd have to run into shelter, wait for a few minutes to see, for just over a minute to see where the mortar would fall or where the rocket would fall. And very often we'd say, oh, thank goodness it was open field, or when it dropped here right near the kindergartens one day, we said, oh, thank goodness the children weren't there, just gone home about half an hour before. Or when they fell in a greenhouse, we'd say, thank goodness the people had just finished work and gone home. But every now and then you wonder, when will luck run out? And how many times will we be able to say, thank goodness? And we know for a fact that luck does run out.
About fearing for the safety and future of her children and grandchildren.
And when I take the little ones for a walk, every step of the way, I think, if there's an alert, where do I go?
And remarkably, about her understanding and concern for the others who live on the other side of the wall. In many ways, Roni became a symbol of the conflict between the politics and the people.
I don't want people to take sides. I don't want people to be pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. I want people to look at the situation and try and think how we can come up with a solution for all of us.
What I came away with was a sense that what we need to do, or what I hope we'll be doing as interfaith leaders, is encouraging those movements on the ground that actually get Palestinians and Israelis to interact with each other, not in grand events, but in those routine, mundane ways, so that out of that they have the kind of history that Roni had that lets you know that the other person is as much a person as you.
And so what I found so impressive about her was her ability to hold onto her pain and the pain of the other, to bring both of them into the room and to not minimize either of them. And I was thinking about that tonight, how you, the people of Stephen Wise Synagogue, and how Omni managed to bring all of us into the room with him and help us understand Israel.
Maybe the good thing about this living under such a tension is that it unites us all, including the children. And I think they will look to be together in the future.
Perhaps the most hopeful place we experienced in all of Israel was the Rabin Medical Center, a sprawling, state-of-the-art facility whose priority on humanity over conflict was a breath of fresh air.
We have underwent situations in which Arabs, Christians, Muslims, and Jews together worked to save terrorist attack victims. Sometimes the attackers themselves were being treated side by side, bed near a bed. The offender and the victim treated by the same staff.
The medical center is the one place where all peoples come together. Doesn't matter who you are, what language you speak, what your religion is, whether you're a man or a woman. They were even treating people from Gaza. I was very struck by that. How can the spirit of that place and the spirit of the dialogue that we were hearing in Haifa kind of flower, take root?
I think that I contributed to the women, Arab women that came to the hospital in many ways. Besides the physician rule, about knowing how they feel, what's the religious issues that go around gynecology, you know, about the pregnancy.
Here we have an example of Jewish donors in the United States who are funding this hospital with the designated specific purpose of that it goes towards a Palestinian doctor. So I think that's actually quite uplifting and inspiring.
Israel is a fascinating, diverse, and sometimes toxic mix of history, religions, and explosive differences of opinions, and almost everyone we spoke to has friends and family who have died because of it.
Here you can see a very, very small collection from over than 9,000 rockets that the terror organization shot since April 2001 till the last week.
Our trip was designed to allow us to listen to the voices on all sides of the Israeli conflict and come to our own conclusions. Our dialogue included an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, a Reformed Jewish leader,
I would like to suggest it all started at the Western Wall when we gave the keys to the holiest site in the Jewish faith to the most ultra-Orthodox faction of Judaism. I'm wearing now the Women of the Wall talit.
the mayor of Bethlehem,
We need to have peace in this part of the world so that we can have peace all over the world.
Muslim leaders,
If you meet someone and say Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, you will take to the prison for 3 months without court. This is what
Christian leaders,
democracy is to respect the diversity. Others have the right to think diversity like me.
a legendary refusenik,
If the only important thing for you is freedom, like John Lennon said, if you don't need all, then the life is losing all its value, all its depth, all its meaning, and becomes decadent.
politicians,
This is a fantastic group. These are imams and people with cloth from Christian churches and rabbis from all 3 denominations. You have lived to see this.
For us, the most important issue, notwithstanding all the tumult and chaos around us, is to achieve peace with the Palestinians.
What we call our war of independence, the Palestinians label a catastrophe. So there's a basic difference of narrative there.
and ultimately, Israeli citizens with no titles, but a huge stake in Israel's survival and quality of life.
Israel is a young country, a very disturbed one, a very complicated one, with tremendous complex.
For they said, the rest of the people, the victims, with this other memorial, they were going like sheep to the slaughter. Because these are the older, the young, the infants, the mothers, the religious population. Israel's society wanted only to be remembered for their resistance. They wanted to forget about the story of the victims, who they said went like sheep to the slaughter.
We are at the house of the president, Shimon Peres, and he is gracious enough to welcome all of us, this delegation, so we are very moved. And we're just coming from Yad Vashem, so it's quite a trip. It's a very special moment. And Shimon Peres himself is a piece of Jewish history, the creation of the State of Israel. So it's very special that he's receiving us.
We've had a trip which has been sometimes very hopeful and sometimes less so, as we've been introduced to segments of Israeli and Palestinian society. And at times I've wondered what the source of the conflict is.
I'm sitting there and all I'm thinking is Ellie is speaking to Shimon Peres. And I don't know if, feet to the fire, someone were to ask me what he actually said to me, I would be able to tell you what he said to me. But all I know is that for one moment he was looking at me and I was looking at him and I was thinking, Elliot, this is cool.
I would like that my country
Israel would be as old as the Ten Commandments and as new as the brain research. I do not see any contradiction between the two.
My question comes out of hearing what seems to be the frustration of some of the people on the ground. They might suggest, as they have to us, a couple of things. One, they wish they could just forget about the leaders and really expect that peace will come from the ground up.
For them to be a leader, you shouldn't try and be on the top, but you should attempt and be ahead of the people, not on top of them.
Oh, I think it's really very important. It shows that there's an enormous amount of sensitivity at the highest level of the Israeli government and also the Palestinian government. In an hour, we're going to Ramallah, and we'll be meeting with the Palestinian Prime Minister as well. So I think it's a very unusual event that we've put together here, a group of very senior and diverse religious leaders. And to anybody's collective memory, this has never happened before. So I think the President wants to give deference to that and respect that, and also wants to encourage us to continue the effort.
The biggest aha moment for me was meeting with Prime Minister Fayyad of the Palestinian Authority.
Well, this was, in my opinion, this was Prime Minister Fayyad at his most political. In my experience, they don't tend to be as candid as this individual was. And he said all of the assumptions that we had about who our friends and our neighbors are, all this, the Arab Spring, or whatever you want to call it, he said, caught us completely by surprise.
This is a very special group that we put together of senior religious leaders from New York City, of all three faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And we're here, among other reasons, to promote the idea of peace and to support the powers on the ground that are working for peace. We want to be able to play a positive role for that, and we hope that you'll give us some guidance on when we return back to New York, how we might be able to do that.
I feel that if in fact the two-state solution is to materialize, and that is what we're committed to. There's no question that interfaith activity will have to play a much more significant, important role that it has played or has been allowed to play so far.
Having just been with Shimon Peres, I thought to myself, if we could just put, the solution of this problem in the hands of these two men, it would be a nanosecond before they'd figure it out.
It was the last night of our trip, and we were honored at a dinner in the town of Jaffa. But we quickly became aware that what we were witnessing was more a miracle than just a meal. The town of Jaffa is sort of a grand experiment, a town where Jews, Christians, and Muslims live side by side, work side by side, where their children go to school side by side. In that spirit, we all spent an evening of dialogue without concern for religion or ethnicity, and the evening ended with local residents sharing their stories and sharing their lives with all of us.
So my life in Jaffa is first of all on this line between a bookstore called Jaffa, which is an Arab bookstore in which you can find Hebrew and English translations of amazing Arab literature.
But when you go back to the States, what the message that you have to convey is that there is hope, and we can have more hope by understanding that the most dangerous people are people that have nothing to lose and people that have no hope.
Dealing with these issues of tolerance and understanding when you have the security, when you are dealing with war all the time, talking about how you deal with issues of war, I think it's very complicated, but we try, we believe, I'm talking about religious people here, and we believe non-religious secular people that we can change and we can deal with those issues together.
You cannot imagine how much congregations or how much the message of rabbis, ministers, and imams traveling together is a significant one to the Israeli citizen. No, this is not a typical group.
I am a blind man today. I cannot see nobody. Now I cannot see with my eyes the people. I see them with my heart For that, I see them, everyone and all together at the same level, the same human being. That's mean, for me, it's not different if we will be a Muslim religious or Jewish religious or Christian one. I look on them as human being and the good inside the human being.
I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because all of the experiences that we'd had in all of Israel were people isolated from one another. People isolated, people living in their own little bubbles next to one another, but not interacting. And here in Haifa and Jaffa, Christians and Jews and Muslims and everybody interacting and living. And apparently, this was not only for our benefit, this was the reality of life in these two places. Now, why can't that model seep into places like Jerusalem?
I was invited to be part of an interfaith mission to Israel, made up of senior religious leaders from New York. There were 15 of us, 4 Protestant ministers, 3 Reform rabbis, 2 Muslim imams, 2 Episcopal rectors, 2 conservative rabbis, 1 Catholic priest, and 1 Unitarian Universalist minister. And a camera crew to record our journey and film a documentary.
It is those who shoot rockets into Israel thinking that Israelis will pack up and leave who are not only delusional, but they're undercutting their own people's right for sovereignty and self-determination.
It's said that there are only 2 places in Israeli society where both Jew and Arab are kind of in the mix and equal and alongside of each other. One is the criminal justice system, and the other is the medical system.
Even though the differences seem light years apart in certain ways, that what both peoples wanted really was to live in peace, to raise their families, to have a decent job, and to have a community that was fair and just.
What you have taking place in Israel right now is this communities being formed in isolation from each other.
I hope that the initial response would be to go back more confused. Because only someone who doesn't really understand the reality on the ground thinks that this problem is solvable easily.
Well, one thing that becomes so very clear is indeed the amazing complexity. How do you ever resolve that? I mean, and then add to that the unpredictability. It's not the kind of thing that I could have really generated a respect for until I'm here on the ground, so to speak.
And it would just be silliness to think that 15 rabbis and priests and imams were going to somehow come back with a solution. But what it did show me is that whenever you have 2 people who recognize each other's humanity and the right of someone to exist, then you have at least the possibility of creating a dialogue, creating a sense of mutual respect, and that might not lead to peace, but that might lead to a lack of war.
I am hopeful, because what's the alternative on one hand?
There appears on the surface to be little that unifies people, and yet underneath of that is this good faith attempt to live together. And I think that's been extraordinarily inspiring over the past couple of days.
We all live in a BlackBerry society. We are with our little things and whatever. So everybody's in their own world. Everybody's in their own church. Everybody's in their own theology. Everybody's in their own. And suddenly we are in a bus together. And suddenly But it's true, from that place to the bus and looking and talking and having these theological conversations, it was completely different. So it was incredible.
Yes. We have a responsibility as leaders in our field to do whatever we can beyond what we have been doing. It's not enough that we simply go back and say, oh, I had a great time. I went to Israel, I saw this, I did this, and oh yes, and I met with the mayor, no, that is not nearly enough. As far as I'm concerned, our trip here was only the beginning.
I have this week felt possibilities in Israel like I've never felt before.
There's a uniqueness about this in a way, comprising Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and that had a force, and I'm pleased to be a part of that force.
I think if people actually experience that, it's got to be what heaven is like. It's got to be what God wants. So this trip was a glimpse of paradise.
There was something for each of us that really made us uncomfortable, but then something for each of us that also gave us hope.
Everything I've learned when it comes to the Middle East, there are entire communities who are learning and preaching and teaching a totally different narrative. That was a sobering moment.
If you want to get to the promised land, you have to wander in a very long desert. Nothing comes easy.
Israel is an idea that has lasted for 3,000 years and been revived in our lifetimes. It's a miracle of unparalleled proportions. It says to the world, if the Jews can do it, after everything that the Jews have endured, other people can dare to hope as well. And that's the fundamental Israel message and the Jewish message, hope.
You are welcome in Jerusalem. You are welcome, everybody. Thank you. Everybody, you are welcome in Israel.
This is the hope. The hope is still real. A Jewish home in Israel.